First of all, I'm very lucky, and you're very lucky, to have Mike Jackson here with us tonight, because he was much more deeply involved than I was in Gays and Lesbians Support the Minors. He, with Mark Ashton, founded the group. He was the secretary of the group. He kept the minutes and the records. Stephen Beresford said that he was a keeper of the flame, and so he was. And he was a principal consultant to the people who made the film. He will correct any mistakes I make and fill in any gaps that I may leave. I was much more on the periphery of LGSM. I shook a bucket at the Fallen Angel pub in Islington. I attended one of their public meetings. I was at the Bronski Beat gig at the Electric Ballroom in Camden on the 10th of December 1984, when there were 1,500 people there, and we raised £5,650 for the striking miners' family. It was the day that I gave up smoking, and I've never smoked since. That was the high point of the fundraising. Di Donovan, sent by the Neath, Dulais and Swansea Valley Miners Support Group, came up to the stage and said, not quite as portrayed in the film, but this is what he actually said: "You have worn our badge, coal, not dole, and you know what harassment means, as we do. Now, we will pin your badge on us, and we will support you. It won't change overnight, but now 140,000 miners know that there are other causes and problems. We know about blacks and gays and nuclear disarmament, and we will never be the same." That was LGSM's achievement. People were changed, their attitudes were changed, those involved never were the same again. Prejudice, both in the gay community and in the mining community, was broken down and solidarity was built. You will have realised that the film is fiction, but fiction built on fact. The strike happened, LGSM happened. The people portrayed in the film, Mike Jackson, Mark Ashton, Gethin Roberts, Sean James, Di Donovan, Jeff Cole, Jonathan Blake, Ray Aller, and others in the film were real people. Joe, also known as Bromley, was made up. Completely fiction, complete invention, and what a lovely invention he was. Stephen Beresford, the screenwriter, is an artist, and he used dramatic license to make a good story. He amalgamated some of the characters and moved things around a bit. So it's not a documentary, it's fiction. The film means a lot to me personally, because LGSM was founded by Mark Ashton and Mike Jackson, and Mark, now dead, was a friend of mine, and Mike was and is a friend of mine. Incredibly, when Mark and Mike were setting up this group, they came to me for advice. God only knows who sent them to me, and God only knows why they came, and I cannot remember what I told them, but nothing that I could have told them could possibly have helped them very much, because I learned much more from them than they ever learnt from me. I was older, but I wasn't any wiser. As you will have seen in the film, LGSM started in June 1984. Mike and Mark bumped into each other at King's Cross, and Mark suggested that they should go on the Pride March. It was in a few days' time, with buckets and collect money for the miners. The strike had started 3 months earlier, when the Thatcher government announced plans to close 20 pits with the loss of 20,000 jobs. And not only that, whole communities in the north of England, in Scotland and Wales, would have lost their primary source of employment, and the whole communities were to be destroyed. After the Gay Pride March, on which about £200 was collected, there was a meeting in the University of London Union addressed by a minor, and a few days later, in Mark's flat, LGSM was formally set up on the 15th of July 1984. Mike was elected secretary, and there wasn't a chairman. They decided to have a rotating chairman and take it in turn who's going to chair their meetings. The people who set it up were mostly communists and socialists of one kind or another, members of the Labour Party, members of the Communist Party, of the Young Communist League, of the International Marxist Group, the Socialist Workers' Party and others. And some, like Colin Clews, were on a line. They didn't belong to any political party, but they hated Thatcher and they supported the miners. Miraculously, this broad coalition worked well together because it was a single issue campaign. They weren't campaigning about anything else except supporting the miners and their families. Pride is a film about lesbian and gay men. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of films about lesbians and gay men. In the last 9 days, this festival here at the BFI is showing 49 feature films and 75 shorts. But Pride is not about cruising and picking up and kissing and having sex. It's about lesbian and gays as human beings, being political, helping another community which, like them, was being attacked by the government, by the police, and by the press. By the end of the strike, more than £22,000 had been raised for the miners and their families, and solidarity had been demonstrated. And not only that, the Labour Party at its conference in Bournemouth in the autumn of '85, with backing from the NUM's block vote, passed for the very first time a resolution committing the Labour Party to the support of gay rights. And the same thing happened at the TUC that year. If it were not for the film, this amazing story would have been lost. Mike kept the records, and he eventually deposited them with the People's History Museum in Manchester. But who is going to go to a museum to look at something which I didn't know existed? And the film has changed all that. The film has made the existence of LGSM known to many, many thousands all over the world. Stephen Beresford, the screenwriter, was about 12 in 1984. He knew nothing about the miners' strike. He knew nothing about LGSM. 8 or 9 years later, he was in a relationship with an older man. Stephen was 21 and the other guy, I don't know his name, was 31. And they had an argument about how political the older guy's generation was than Stephen's was that time earlier. At that time, there was a second wave of pitch closures driven by Michael Heseltine, who was the Tory Deputy Prime Minister. And the older man suggested that they might do something to help the miners. And Stephen said, "Why? What have they ever done to help us?" And his partner said, "Bullshit! Shut up! Let me tell you a story." And Stephen's reaction was threefold. It was, first of all, "Fuck you for being so annoying." Second, "I really don't believe that actually happened." And third, if it actually happened, I'm going to write about it one day. In September 2010, he had a brainstorming session with David Livingstone, who was to be the producer of the film. And at the start, he said to himself, "Shall I tell him about this or shall I not bother?" And he decided not to bother. And they spent an evening, an hour or more, throwing ideas back and forth and saying, well, perhaps, perhaps not, maybe, but not coming to any conclusion. And at the very end, when Stephen had his coat on and actually had his hand on the door handle, David said, "Is there nothing that you really wanted to make a film about?" And Stephen said, "Well, actually there is, but it will never be made, never be made." And David said, David bristled and said, "How do you know? Tell me." And Stephen told David the story. And by the time he had finished, David's eyes were moist. And he said, "Let's make it. How long will it take you?" After that, what next? It was necessary to get in touch with the people actually involved. Stephen came across a film called All Out Dancing in July, a very amateur production made by LGSM in 1985. There was no director listed, no producer. None of the people in the film were actually identified by name. At the end of the film, there was a list of names saying produced by Mark Ashton, Roddy Barnes, Stephanie Chambers, Jeff Cole, Nicola Field, Derek Hughes, Martin King, Andrew Matheson, and another list, photographs taken by 11 names. But these names at the end were only a little less common than John Jones or Mary Smith. And how do you get in touch with them? But one name stood out, Reggie Blennerhassett, Blennerhassett. Now, there are not very many Reggie Blennerhassetts around. Facebook had been invented in 2004. It was worldwide by September 2006, and this was 2010. So Stephen typed into Facebook Reggie Blennerhassett, and Reggie replied, and Reggie put Stephen in touch with Mike Jackson, and Bob's your flicking uncle, the film could be made. Obviously, it took time. There's a lot more research to be done, with Mike playing a very big part, and other LGSMers being interviewed, and then the casting, and then the actual filmmaking, and this took 3 to 4 years. We now come to the mentioned earlier. There were 2 fat, steaming turds. First of all, LGSM, as I mentioned, was made up of communists and Trots and socialists of one kind and another. Mark was General Secretary of the Young Communist League by that time. Mike was in the Communist Party but subsequently left. And this were all totally hidden in the film. No one would have guessed that these people portrayed in the film were socialists and communists of one kind or another. Why? Because the makers of the film were told in no uncertain terms that it would not be distributed in the United States if this was made clear. It seems to me this is incredibly childish, and that it's time that the Americans grew up and realized that communists are part of the real world. The second turd is that the US cover of the DVD completely sanitized it and removed all references to lesbian and gays. They were turned into a group of London activists. And this is so stupid that it's almost incredible. Okay, perhaps communists were fairly thin on the ground in the United States, but for God's sakes, they had plenty of gays. And, you know, imagine an innocent American buying this DVD and taking it home and for his family and switching it on, and shock horror, it's about homosexuals. I don't know. No one buying the DVD in the UK can be in any illusions about the sexuality or the politics of the people concerned. The cover says plainly that it's lesbian and gays. And a full-page article in the Observer on the 24th of September last year by my friend Jamie Doward made it clear to all the world that Mark Ashton was a communist and the others were either communists or socialists. And there have been numerous pieces in Morning Star also explaining that these people were very much on the left. And I want to read you something that Mark wrote in April 1986 in a publication called 7 Days. The article was headed "Straight Talking to Straights." And Mark said, "Life is full of little pitfalls, a truism, but for gay men, those little pitfalls are gaping great grand canyons. The ability to negotiate them is a sixth sense possessed by most out-sussed queens. Secrecy is the key during childhood and adolescence, sensitiveness during the coming out period, and discretion thereafter. Up until now, our problems, discrimination, repression, guilt, violence, anxiety, and ridicule have been surmountable, either through excesses of bravado or retreat into camp. Both of these responses develop out of life's experiences which determine what response to use in which situation. By thinking fast, most of us can avoid queer bashing, most of the time. But there's always the odd time, and I know very few of my friends who haven't experienced them, when all you can do is scream for help, have an epileptic fit and hope that will scare them off, or run, or last option, take your chance in the ring. But AIDS, this is frightening, because unlike all the other threats, trials and tribulations, which are part and parcel of our daily lives, we aren't yet sure how to respond to this. We could be infected by the virus from our lovers. Should we be infected, we could go on to develop AIDS. And if we develop AIDS, we will probably die. On Friday, the 30th of January 1987, Mark was admitted to Guy's Hospital in London with pneumocystis carinii pneumonia and was diagnosed as having AIDS. He had been diagnosed with HIV some 18 months earlier, but very few of his friends knew about that. I didn't know, Mike didn't know. But Mark didn't want to be seen as an HIV victim. He was a human being, a gay activist, a communist, and being HIV positive was not what defined him. That evening, the 30th of January 1987, I, after work, took a red rose to Guy's Hospital, and there was Mark sitting up, holding court, entertaining his friends and camping it up. By the next afternoon, the Septrin clearly wasn't working, and Johnny Orr, his former lover, and I were the only people admitted to his room. Every night, Johnny and I went to the hospital. On the fourth night, I took Mark in some apple trudel, something I know he loved, but I doubt if he ever was able to eat it. I gave it to the nurses and heard no more about it. Then his parents arrived, and Johnny and I were excluded from the room, but we still went to the hospital. On the 5th of February, I saw Mark for the last time. Every morning, I phoned the hospital to ask how he was. And on Wednesday, the 11th of February, I was told by the nurse that he had died at 5 a.m. I'm told that I did not smile for 3 months. 7 other members of LGSM were also killed by this bloody virus. Mark had a very large funeral at the Lambeth crematorium. About 80 of us squeezed into the chapel. I was lucky enough to be one of those who got in, and many, many more were outside. Mark's parents and his kid brother Lee, on their way by car to the crematorium, thought they'd got mixed up with a football crowd, but it wasn't. It was the people going to the funeral. After the cremation, his ashes were scattered on Lawn B, Square 66. 2 months later, there was a large memorial gathering at the Tabernacle, Powis Square in North Kensington. It was emceed by Hugo Irwin, a close friend of mine and of Mark's, also known as Peggy Lash or the Duchess of Peckham. He was killed 6 years later by the same virus. Mike and I both spoke. Jimmy Somerville and Richard Coles, now an Anglican priest, performed. They were with Bronski Beak and they'd become the Communards. 300 people were present. I've got newspaper cuttings with no less than 35 immemorial notices, 4 obituaries, at least 2 memorial panels for Mark were made in the Names Project quilt. I made one of them, somebody else made the other. Jimmy Somerville wrote a song about Mark for a friend, which began, "I never cried the way I cried o'er you. Somewhere else, someone else is crying too." The Communards dedicated their album Red to Mark. There are references to Mark in at least 5 books, numerous PhD dissertations and other articles. He has his own entry in Wikipedia with a very nice photograph. Now there's a film about him, and last week he was mentioned in a House of Commons early day motion where tribute was paid to him. He changed my life. I was unable to give to Mark the love and care that I would like to have done, but for 18 years I worked with people living with HIV, first at the London Lighthouse, then at the Terence Higgins Trust, and then at the Cobler Clinic at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. I set up a Red Ribbon Fund at the Terence Higgins Trust in Mark's memory, which has now reached 19,600 and something pounds and a few pence. I organised a reunion on the 20th anniversary of his death, which a lot of his friends attended. I pierced the lobe in my right ear and have worn an earring in his memory ever since. Mark was greatly loved and is terribly missed by me and many, many others.
So few people do actually keep archives of what they're doing because they're living the moment, and one understands that. But how sad that as time goes by, they haven't actually got a history to draw on. So, I'm really grateful for the Bishopsgate Institute and LAGNA trying to gather this information together. So no matter what little organisation you or people that you might know are involved in, if it's just a rent strike or something really local, it's really important to keep it and to document it. I'm thinking on my feet here now. I'll just go back, I'll be a bit personal, I'll just go back to my own kind of genesis, as it were. I was born in Accrington in Lancashire in 1954, which then was it's when we had industry in Britain. Yeah. It was a horrible town. It was a completely working class Lancashire industrial town. It stunk to high heaven. We had a coal mine, we had cotton mills, we had textile machinery manufacturing factories, we had foundries, a gasworks, a dog biscuit factory. chemical works, lovely, yeah. So it was a very smelly background. I remember when colour television was about to come out thinking, what's that? Because there wasn't any colour in my life, basically. It was all monochrome. And there I was kind of in the 60s, kind of struggling with my sexuality. I was hardly coming from a kind of liberal middle-class background. It was quite a kind of rough old working class background. Father killed when I was a little boy, so mother having to bring me and my older sister up as a single parent. And I was, as I say, I struggled with my sexuality. I was having sex with men in public toilets and parks. In retrospect, of course, you know, I was under 16, let alone 21, so obviously these men were paedophiles. But I was seeking that sex. But concomitant with that was a terrible feeling of the mad, the sad and the bad. Yeah, I absorbed the lot. And of course, I mean, I appreciate who I'm speaking to right now in this room, but a lot of people don't realise that you don't get an exemption certificate being a young homosexual. You know, you absorb all that homophobia just like anyone else did. A few years ago, I was chatting with some gay friends and said, of course I've got homophobia in me. They say, how can you have homophobia in you? That's ridiculous. I said, well, of course, I don't get exempted from it. Time passes by. I left school at 16 with a silly set of O-levels, didn't really amount to anything. But the one thing that I did know that I wanted to do was get into horticulture, which is a very unusual choice for a working class lad from Accrington at that time. And I just wonder if the queer bit in me just like feared factories and smelliness and that kind of thing, and the flowers appealed, who knows. So I was very lucky in the sense that although I'd not got very good academic results at school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So my first job was in Walsall in the West Midlands, working in their parks department. I then kind of got this wonderful job in Worcestershire, and I was trying to take my maths O-level because I'd failed it first time round, getting a grade 7 at school. Did it for another year after school, got another grade 7. Did it for a third time and got a grade 8. So the more I studied maths, the worse it got. Until somebody said, I mean, I was loving this job and it was a beautiful garden I was working in. I was encouraged by the older men and enjoying it a lot. And somebody said, why don't you try Kew Gardens? Because they don't require O-levels. And I said, what's Kew Gardens? Never heard of it. Anyway, I managed to get in at Kew. So by default, really, I ended up going to one of the best institutions that there is. And of course, Kew brought me to London, ostensibly. And I started reading Time Out. And I noticed that this is 1973. They had little classified adverts about that big. And I'd read it on the tube, paranoid that the passengers either side of me could somehow discern what I was reading, and they'd just go, you're homosexual. So it took a long time to pluck up the courage to phone, well, it didn't actually take that long time. When I think about it, it was September 73 when I went, and I think by November, I finally found this isolated telephone box and phoned up Gay Switchboard. And if I've got traces of a Lancashire accent now, it was a great deal stronger then, as you might imagine. And, you know, I would have argued with the volunteers on Switchboard, saying things like, I know you think it's all right, but I don't think it's all right. And that conversation probably took place several times until finally the penny dropped. And actually, maybe it was okay to be gay. And then I just went through this transformation almost overnight of being this sad, depressed, frightened, lonely young gay man into this incandescently angry and joyous person at the same time. It's a real mixture of the two. And the very first place I ever went to, the Switchboard referred me to, and I would love to find out if that guy's still alive who organised it, but believe it or not, it was a Roman Catholic priest who organised the lesbian and gay disco in Maida Vale in his Roman Catholic church hall. He wore a black cassock as you as he greeted you at the door. There was a dance set in one corner. If you're too young to find that out, Google it. And there we were in this room, and it was full of very frightened, vulnerable young lesbians and gay men. It was the days when people asked you if they could have a dance with you, which seems really comical these days. And this handsome young man came up to me. Now, bear in mind, I'd been having sex in public spaces with older men, but always felt very dirty about it and shameful about it. And this young man came up to me and said, "Would you like a dance?" And all we did was kiss. We didn't go home for sex afterwards or anything. But at that moment, as we were kissing, all that residual layers of self-repression just peeled away. Tongues down throats. I just thought, nobody can ever tell me again that this is not natural. I didn't fucking realise this is what I wanted. And it was somehow, as a gay man, connecting emotion with sex. And really, there was no turning back from then. I very soon applied to Keele University, and I went as a mature student, aged 19, to Keele University. Now, that was 1976. It would have been a Labour government then, probably a Wilson or a Callaghan government in 1976. Working class lad, get to university, no fees, full grants in vacation times. Because I'd been working previously, it was not only could I claim unemployment benefit during the university holidays, but I got earnings-related unemployment benefit. I mean, for younger people, that must seem unbelievable, but there was such a thing, yeah. And so we still had governments, that post-1945 settlement, that tried to help working class people get ahead, yeah, give them opportunities. And I'm ever so grateful for that, that I got that opportunity. I don't think the ruling class will be too happy about it, because I've been a fucking nuisance ever since. I am grateful only to those post-1945 settlers, and I've used every bit of my kind of further education, higher education, to attack them, and I continue to do so. So I went to Keele. We set up a gay switchboard at Keele. We tried to get that advertised in the Evening Sentinel, which still is the local newspaper up there, because they were homophobic. They refused to take payment for our advert or to accept an advert from us, and they could, because we had no protective legislation, of course. So we occupied their offices and told them to fuck off. Okay. I finished at Keele. I moved to London. So I'm now out for about 7 years. Oh, by the way, the first demonstration I ever went on, the first protest march, was the pro-abortion march when the Corrie Bill, anybody help me out here? I think it was the Corrie Bill, yeah, 1974 maybe. And that was very exciting. It was also very funny, because the police had got it in their head that clearly people who were pro-abortion were baby haters, and they formed a double cordon of security outside Mothercare in Oxford Street. And the entire march just laughed at them as it passed by, and these beleaguered policemen just not understanding what's happening. It comes to about 1982-3, and I applied to work as a volunteer on London Gay Switchboard, having founded North Staffordshire Gay Switchboard 5 years previously. And I am interviewed by two gentlemen, a guy called Costa and a guy called Mark Ashton. This really handsome, dynamic firebrand of a person. He's asking me all these interview questions and scribbling down the notes, and I've still got a copy of that. And then he starts asking me some really personal questions about where did I go on the scene, etc., etc. And I thought, oh, he's flirting with me, I like this. Anyway, I was accepted as a volunteer on Switchboard. And it became quite quickly obvious that Mark was a complete lefty, as I was. Although I wasn't politically aligned to a political party. I've always been a bit flaky about that. But the comical thing is with Mark, everybody who works on London Gay Switchhood had to have 2 tasks. So you would answer the phones, obviously. But the other thing that we had to do, we had to have some kind of admin task. And I had the great pride of being the map person. So I stuck coloured pins in maps of the UK. Here's a legal thing, there's a bar, there's a campaign for homosexual equality meeting or whatever. And Mark, as General Secretary of the Young Communist League, he looked after the religious file. So this I can see it now. It's a red ring binder, and it was completely plastered on the outside with communist iconography, like opium is religion is the opium of the masses, and hammers and sickles. Of course, Mark would never do a disservice to the callers, and he would always help them, and he was very knowledgeable. But that was quite comical. And so Mark and I became really good mates. And what followed next, Chris has robbed me of being able to tell you about, because he's told it in such great detail. So fast track to the movie. Obviously, we are incredibly proud and pleased that Stephen's brought this history. Obviously, there's a bit of an ego boost for us all. That would be stupid to deny that. But what's far more important is it gets a bit of British social working class history and struggle out there globally. And the responses to the movie, I think there's only one person in the world who didn't like it, and that's a journalist for the Financial Times. So I think we should maybe send him a letter, because he must feel a very lonely man. The Daily Mail liked it. Sorry? The Tatler. Okay, yeah. And quite a lot of Tories like it. I gave a talk, Q&A to Stonewall. You'll all know who Stonewall are. And I've got to be careful here because I'm on camera, but never mind. This gentleman came up to me at the piss-up afterwards and just said, hello. And he was all terribly tweedy, and he had a very young handbag draped round his arm, about 22 years old, and said, hello, do you have something to do with this movie? And I said, yes, I might. My character's portrayed in me. Oh, I think it's absolutely marvellous, really, and what you people achieved, it was just magnificent. Now, you're probably going to want to kill me now, because, you see, I've been a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party all my life. But you see, I'm from Essex, and we don't know anything about the North. And I'm just thinking, mate, doesn't even know South Wales is not the North. You know? And these are the people who govern us, yeah? I mean, some of them are completely wicked and evil, but some of them are just plain darn ignorant and stupid, yeah? And what a dangerous combination that our leaders are either completely evil bastards, and they know that they are, or they're really completely witless. One of the people have said to us that they've been inspired by the movie. They want to get involved in activism, and particularly young people. There's somebody right in front of me now, who's one of them. And they've said, what can we do? And what we're saying is, do whatever, find your cause, no matter what it is, and just get involved, yeah? And the message of the movie really is that politics is not about predominantly white men who wear grey suits who work in Westminster. That's a tiny, tiny, to my mind, almost irrelevant part of what politics is about. Politics is about ordinary people doing things and coming together. And you look at the Chartists, you look at the Tolpuddle Martyrs, you look at the suffragettes, you look at the civil rights movement in the States, you look at LGSM in the 80s, and that's just ordinary people deciding that they've had enough and they will fight the fight, yeah? And it can bring pleasure, it can bring pain, it can bring injury, it can bring arrest or whatever, but it is incredibly empowering to do that. And I'm hoping that the impact of LGSM, we're all silver hairs now, if we've got hair at all, but I'm hoping for as long as the currency of the movie exists, that we can hopefully inspire and engage people in politics. Now, we put a big call out for people to come to the Pride March this year. It will be the 30th anniversary of the Delice miners coming on that Pride March. What happens is in the movie, if you remember, is almost exactly true. We'd had a meeting, and some of the comrades, some of the more kind of enthusiastic comrades in Lesbians and Gay Sport the Miners had said, we should be leading the Gay Pride March this year. We're the best thing since sliced bread. Others, including myself, said, well, no, let's just march with the Labour and Trade Union contingent, and that was agreed upon. But actually, when it came to the day, we'd publicised in Capital Gay and other organs that the miners were joining us, but I don't think people really believed that they would honour that. And when the miners arrived and they were assembling their huge silk banner in Hyde Park, I remember people just coming into the park saying, oh my God, the miners have come. And so what happened, the crowd around us grew and grew and grew until one of the Gay Pride volunteers had to come running up to us and said, you'll have to lead the march, you're just too big, we cannot get you out of the park otherwise. So by default, we did end up leading it. This time round, 30 years ago, the Pride in London Organising Committee have welcomed us with open arms and asked us to lead the Pride March. Perhaps you're aware that the Tredegar Town brass band are going to come and join us, the same band that were in the movie. And we're putting a call out to the entire Labour and Trade Union movement, regardless of sexuality, to come and join us as an expression of solidarity. And I want to see a really motley crew with us. I want to see every cause in the world being there, whether it's your kind of local knitting club, whether it's about supporting some immigrants who are being attacked or whatever it is, bring it along, bring your cause. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure my comrade here will agree with me, there's only ever been one fight really since the beginning of capitalism, and that's capital versus labour. Yeah, and the one thing that they cannot stand when they're defending their capital is us uniting. If we unite, we're absolutely irresistible, and that's why it's so important for the neoliberals to keep up this propaganda campaign, constantly dividing us, distracting us. They never refer to the bankers as having caused the financial crisis. It's the Labour Party or it's the trade unions or whatever. Is it yeah, it's that old fight of labour versus capital. And what I'd be really pleased with and proud of is at Pride this year, if we get a huge contingent with every diverse thing imaginable. I've even got some mates from Kew Gardens coming to champion flowers and horticulture. They also are being under threat. I think they've had a £5 million cut in their funding. So I would implore you to come, bring your mates, bring your cause, bring your placard. Okay, thank you.